You're listening to another episode of Open Source CXO, the podcast designed to share insights on how to excel in your business using technology, regardless of the industry. Host Robert Kehoe is a self-taught software developer who has grown to the role of CEO. Renowned for his collaborations with organizations such as Stanford University, Nelnet, and Louis Vuitton, he continually seeks new challenges to conquer in the world of tech. Accompanying him is Don Blackburn, a veteran COO with over 25 years of experience in cultivating diverse relationships and driving innovation in various technical projects. Each week, they'll be sitting down with some of the nation's foremost technology leaders to develop an open source playbook, drawing from their firsthand experiences in the field. Let's talk some tech.
Today, our guest is Ben Kittrell, VP of Engineering for Homebase, a local company here in Kansas City. Welcome, Ben. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Homebase is a smart building technology company, mostly focused on multifamily buildings, apartment buildings, student housing, and we build solutions around access control, Wi-Fi, thermostats, like smart integration into apartment buildings. And we were recently acquired by a company called Quext, based out of Lubbock, Texas. A very similar company, a lot of synergy there. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Nice. What's your team composition look like from a development perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So it's still pretty separate at this point. It's a fresh acquisition. So the Homebase team, two teams of three U.S.-based engineers and 3 to 4 offshore resources. And it's kind of a standard like Scrum squad, product owner, designer, developer type of situation.
So the company that acquired you guys, are they bigger than you guys? Do they have as many devs? Like what does that all look like?
So
or did your numbers include all that?
No, that was just the Homebase team. The Quext team is quite a bit larger. They have similar products, but they have more as well. They have a AI chatbot and some leasing agent technology that they're working on, and they actually own an IoT dev shop called Clika Technology, and so they have a lot of their resources. So their team's quite a bit bigger, but a lot more outsourced, I would say.
Gotcha. And I think one of the topics we wanted to discuss today was kind of working distributed. They're in Lubbock. So is your team from Homebase, are they distributed as well? Are they here in Kansas City?
No, it's a hybrid model. So, but everyone lives in Kansas City or in the area.
Yeah. Was it always that way? I was thinking, I know you haven't been there that long, but...
Pretty much, yeah. I mean...
Or was that just a COVID thing?
So you mean, has it always been hybrid? Or
right.
I don't know that much. I think it was mostly on site before COVID.
Gotcha.
I guess in your opinion, one of the biggest challenges that, the argument, I guess, would be as far as work is concerned and being productive. What side of the fence do you fall on? Has most of your experience been on site or like in person, or have you been?
So I've done a lot of both. So for example, the company that I built, DoodleKit, was almost exclusively remote. Most of that was built really in Campfire 37 Signals chat room. So there's that. But I've done a lot of on-site development or leadership. My first I would call really full remote experience was I was at Red Nova. They were acquired by Sparefoot, became Storable, and then whenever we, like a lot of companies, when COVID happened, the decision was made to go fully remote and to not go back. That was a clear decision. So that was really where I started learning about what it actually means to be remote and how to develop a strategy or a process and all of that. And then, at Homebase, it's been kind of back and forth. Different people have different opinions. But to your point, really it is interesting because pretty much no matter what these days, if you're, even just partnerships, it's unlikely that the partner you're going to integrate with is in the same location. And so everybody kind of has to be set up mostly for this in some way. It's kind of more about how deep you go. But from a productivity perspective, I think it's obviously a heated debate And I think that it's like with everything else. It's how you do it, right? Like if you took a on-site company and just said, all right, we're going to be remote, and that's all you said, that could probably be a disaster. You do have to run things differently. Things have to be, in my opinion, a lot more disciplined and intentional, which is not necessarily a bad thing anyway. Like you could be doing that in the office, and probably get more productivity in the office that way if you did the same things, but it's not necessarily as required because you got to think about like I try not to be the manager that's constantly thinking about if people are working, but you that's part of your job, right?
Right.
And so you can do that. It's a lot easier to see, hey, Joe Schmo's at their desk and typing, so I assume that they're working on this, but it's a lot easier for that to fade. So you've got to do things like I'm a strong believer that if you give people good problems to solve and develop good culture, they want to work on it, right? Like that's the type of culture I want to build. Is not that I have to be cracking a whip. It's that like I would be everyone wants to work because we're all in this together. So those are like aspects that you have to make sure are in place. So but on the flip side, like if you're running a call center, you'd have more metrics and stuff to actually see, oh, well, this person is literally on the phone all this time. So it kind of depends. There's a lot of factors in there, but I don't think one is inherently more productive than the other. I think it's all about how you manage it and run it.
Absolutely.
I think it's amazing how it's become such a polarizing issue.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on social media, LinkedIn and so forth, it's you get people that are just willing to die on that hill, right? That's their cause is remote work and how everybody should be remote. It's crazy anybody's working in the office and so forth. And then you have the others, that are saying no.
You can find an article that tells you that one is more productive and have a bunch of stats to back it up, and you can find another article that says the exact opposite of that.
I've always kind of been of the mind it's up to the individual too. And I don't know if you've found that from a development standpoint, we're hybrid and some of us are in all the time, some of us are remote all the time. But I think it's up to the individual. I've seen people that are awesome at working remote, and then I've seen people that are terrible at it. That just aren't productive, and in those cases, you gotta.
I will say that going from my last two positions actually were fully remote. So between Storable and Homebase, I was at Tap Goods, and that was a situation where I met only 4 people in the company in person. My entire dev team I'd never met in person at all. And then coming to Homebase where it's a hybrid, I did realize there is value in having people physically together, but it's kind of, I think, isolated, or it doesn't have to be all the time, right? Like it's, hey, let's get together. We're trying to figure out this weird problem. Let's get on the whiteboard. It's a lot easier to do that for certain situations. But that to me is more the exception than the rule.
I'd imagine that would be a lot of, we're in the technical field. So, most of our jobs done online on a computer. So do you think tech teams have it a little easier, more of the ability to work remotely
Absolutely.
than maybe some other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have the ability to be completely remote. It's just the what to what extent that is.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of personality, like you were just saying, Don, some personality stuff in there. Where how do you keep before I ask that, before and after COVID, did you see any increase or decrease at all in productivity?
I
was curious. That was the question I had listed. I was curious.
So the way I track productivity, which isn't really tracking productivity, is output. Like what based off of the resources that we have, are we getting the end results that we expect in terms of shipping product, the value of that product, all of those things, which actually is funny because I think that so many companies focus so much less on that, which is so much more of a variable or factor in productivity. The processes you have in place, the communication, the people, whether you're a hybrid or remote, like people could be spending so much more time on that and getting more value than even thinking about whether it's hybrid or remote. So in terms of productivity, I didn't really notice that one was particularly more productive than the other. Not really.
Okay.
It's a little harder to build a culture, and or
Mm-hmm.
to really kind
I
of
see
have a
that
team
again.
atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's a little easier when everybody's in together, and there's a certain amount of water cooler talk,
Mm-hmm.
and people doing lunches together and stuff
Yeah.
like that. The team bonding.
Yeah, some of the conversations we have nothing to do with the
Right.
job.
Right, but when we do have guys that are hybrid, then they do come to the office. They always want to go to lunch together, and they always,
Mm-hmm.
or there's always a lot of, good conversation going on, whether it be around the project or about personal stuff. It doesn't matter. It's just all kind of that team bonding thing.
I saw one study that I did find interesting. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was saying, early stage startups, there's a huge discrepancy between the productivity, and that you're going to get a lot more productivity being on site and together during those early stages. And then once you get to the growth stage, it kind of dramatically is kind of 50-50, gets back to 50-50. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, as if you're ideating and you're whiteboarding and trying to figure out what this thing is, the communication flows a lot better. That said, I'm advising a company right now that it's in that startup phase, and we're fully remote and doing really well. So
Yeah.
So do you guys do anything special or unique to build that team culture to get, there's a certain level,
Yeah.
you could work with somebody, but, building sort of that team culture,
yeah,
whether, distributed, or even I think a few of you guys were offshore too, I think is what
Yeah.
you said. So I was just curious if you guys did anything special.
definitely. Yeah, so I think the first thing is just thinking about it. I think that's where a lot of people fall short, is they're like, hey, let's just go remote. We've got Zoom, we've got Slack, but being intentional about it and communicating expectations is a huge part of it too. Especially in a hybrid model, that's really difficult, because if you tell people you can work at home, they're going to work at home.
Yeah.
If you expect them to come in, you've got to either make them come in or give them a reason to come in, that type of thing. But as far as the actual, like, a fully remote culture, like, you're not going to have those water cooler talks. You're not going to have the happy hour. So you have to facilitate that in some way. And so I think part of it is trying to inject more of that camaraderie in your regular meetings and your scrum ceremonies, or whatever. But also, like, we would do virtual happy hours, and
And do you find that to be an important thing? I know one of
absolutely.
the arguments that I've heard is it's not, a lot of people go, oh, that's not necessary. I just want to do my job and I want to get out.
I do think there's an interesting element to that, where I think a lot of, for a long time, people have overblown the idea
Yeah.
that we all have to be a family, and, like, it has to, like, I mean, certainly people are more productive when they enjoy their jobs and feel, but I do think there's an interesting thing that happens when you're fully remote, where you kind of engage in that a little bit, but just enough, and it doesn't have to go over any lines, just as far as, like, it feels like this is forced or anything.
Yeah,
like
exactly. When it's forced, it's not real anyway.
well, and that's a lot about your management style, but I definitely think that it's important. Every time we do a happy hour, I'd always get really good feedback, like, oh, I love that. Let's do that again, really quickly.
Is that because you're the boss, though? And
That's because I'm good at what I do, right?
The new boss,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, that's true. No, I think it was genuine, and it all depends on how you run it too. Like, I typically, my whole thing about culture, whether it's remote or on site, is that I can't create it, I can't force it. I have to facilitate it and allow it to happen.
Right.
And it's the same thing when you're doing, like, a virtual happy hour, where, like, if I were like, okay, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that, it would just feel weird. But
What does one do on a virtual happy hour? I don't think we've ever done that. What kind of things would you guys?
a very popular thing is, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's an online game thing, Jam Box or something like that. I can't remember, but it's like trivia questions, or like icebreakers,
So
or drawing games.
It's an engaging
it's
sort
just
of.
it's like, it's a time for everybody to not talk about work at all,
Okay.
and to not that you make that a rule, but it's just like, and to have those experiences where you get to know somebody a little bit more, maybe more than you should, maybe it's definitely more than you did, Alcohol is always good to make a part of that, if that's appropriate in that context. But yeah, it's kind of a free time, and that's why I usually there's somebody on the team that's the right person to run it, the more social person, especially with programmers. Most of us aren't super social.
It wouldn't be me.
Yeah.
I promise you that.
Yeah, but hopefully you have that one person that's like wants to do it, and it's like, oh yeah, let's do this and this and this, and but I do really genuinely feel like it's a super important element, even just to kind of keep a hold on that sort of social aspect, because it's so easy to get isolated.
Yeah,
exactly, and that's actually another point. Were you gonna ask?
I was gonna say I've heard of other groups doing like 2 truths and a lie.
Yeah, exactly,
and stuff like that, because it helps you get to know each other on a personal basis, not just through work. Right? You see people on Zoom calls every day, but you don't realize that hey. I grew up in Kentucky, or whatever the case may be.
It's successful whenever that carries out on into like Slack or whatever, and the next day they're like, joking about, oh, you said you love dolphins, haha, post a funny dolphin meme or whatever.
Exactly. So you obviously, it sounds like it helps build that. It gets people to know each other, which I think helps the work overall. But what about the times? How do you spot? It's difficult when somebody's here, even at our office, we'll have somebody come in and they might seem a little more down that day, or they might seem this way or that way. And you can kind of be, you can kind of be there and adjust kind of what you're doing to cater to something like that. How do you spot somebody being a little, maybe trying to overcome that isolation or that feeling of just being completely disconnected from either the team or the work? They're not feeling it. Do you guys do anything? Like, is there any sort of traits or anything like that you would kind of look for? Because it's a little harder to see that remotely.
Yeah. I try to get that out through one-on-ones. I do at the very least biweekly one-on-ones with every direct report. And those one-on-ones are usually the time where I'm like, it's hard, but you try to get people to make it a safe space so they can say whatever they need to. And, I'll try to, you got to probe, but not probe too much, 'cause sometimes, somebody's upset, but asking them about it's going to make it worse. And, but like, I think that's just the job of a manager. And some of it's not science. Some of it's like just feeling things out and recognizing that somebody's having a problem and talking through it.
Yeah, I think a big part of leadership is that empathy. So just trying to spot that, locate it, and maybe it has nothing to do with the job. It could be something completely different. But okay, that makes sense. So you'll do just kind of weekly one-on-ones, and just so does that consist of very specific questions, or I guess how do you mind if I ask how kind of one-on-ones go?
No problem. So I try to early on set the stage, like what can this be, what should this be. I try to make it more prescriptive and disciplined up first, just because usually in my experience people don't come to one-on-ones like prepared or ready or whatever, and so and I've got some techniques like career development techniques where I've got this matrix that I stole from somebody else that's like, here's all the different levels of engineer, and here's all of these characteristics, and where do you fall in this, and if you want to move from a junior to a senior, like should you be focusing on how you interact with the product team, or how you interact with internally in the team, and are you broadening the scope of your influence and all of those things. And I try to start with that, and then it kind of becomes more kind of free flow after that. I always start with, what's on your list today. Sometimes that they never have a list, and sometimes they'll come with a list. But again, I try to make it really informal and more of and I also try to always come with something, right? Because otherwise it feels like it's a waste of time. So, either like right now we're going through this acquisition. So I always try to have some kind of update, even if the update is there's no update, just to have something to talk about. That's really no different, whether it's remote or whatever.
Are you in the office at all?
I come in about 3 days a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have some devs that come in as well?
Yeah, almost everyone. I think there's a couple that rarely come in, but almost everyone. But it's kind of scattered. I do think that I would prefer, that we had a little bit more structure around it, and I think we were kind of driving in that direction, and then this acquisition happened, and now it's kind of like all bets are off, and we're trying to figure
Right.
out like the broader like policy. But I do think we'll drive towards more of a what I would prefer is leading by remote first, right? Like we set up all of the process and everything around remote so that we're able to handle that, but then make the fact that we do have an office that people go in an added bonus, and kind of make that something that people want to do, like have a reason to come in. Hey, we all come in on Thursday so we can get lunch, or work on this weird problem that we've been thinking about. That's where I would prefer to have it.
Yeah.
But right now it's kind of like all over the place.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of just getting together, discussing even architectural solutions or challenges. You can kind of get through them quickly. Whiteboarding it out always seems to help. So I'm a big fan. So even though you guys offer that hybrid work, do you guys hire? If you had to hire somebody, would it be one of those things where you want to confine it to Kansas City in case they want to come in, or are you guys totally cool with, hey, let's go to Seattle, get some people there?
We haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay.
So I've been here about 8 months, and we're as a part of this acquisition trying to figure out what that looks like as far as hiring. So I haven't had the chance to hire anybody here yet. That's a really hard problem, and I don't really have an answer for that right now, actually. But my preference would be to open that up, because like it really does expand your,
But that does
Bigger
inherently
problem.
take the hybrid off
Right.
the docket.
It makes it more
Completely.
complex,
Yeah.
right? Like, but at the same time, we do have 7 engineers in the Philippines, so we're already kind of dealing with that a little bit. I think it would just have to be like, accounting for that, and you have, if you might have to make up for certain things, like, okay, well, yeah, we're going to have this all team meeting, and we're going to have a happy hour and stuff like that for the people that can make it, and for the people that can't. Like,
Do your Philippine developers join you guys on your happy hours?
not really, no.
Okay.
They're on a totally different schedule.
So do they, just out of curiosity here, do they feel just as much part of the team?
I wouldn't think so.
little
No,
different?
it's definitely a different situation. It's really, really difficult to do that with the time zone difference. And I'm not a fan of like making people work overnight.
Yeah.
Like it just you're not going to get good results from that. So my whole thing on offshoring is it does really have to be treated differently. Now at Tap Goods, we did a lot of nearshoring in Latin America, where we were in the same time zone, and in that case, we definitely treated everyone, pretty much as there's no difference between somebody in Sao Paulo than somebody in New York.
Gotcha.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. How do you manage kind of that work-life balance? Or specifically, it could be from an employee's perspective or a leader's perspective. One of the biggest challenges that I see is either somebody taking their work home with them, which if they're at home, it's constant, especially as a developer. You're always trying to think through problems and solutions. But on the flip side of that, you can get a little comfortable at home, and you may not work nearly as much as you probably should.
Yeah.
So is there any suggestions or anything like that you would say, hey, this is the
Definitely.
way, we look out for this or we do that?
Yeah, so I spent a good part of my career and life working way too hard and way too long, on the couch, all of that. And I made a really clear decision to break that habit. And so for probably at least 10 years, it's been, these are my work hours and nothing after that. And obviously, unless something comes up.
Well, of course, there's circumstances, right?
Right. But, and to the point where I think it's really important to have a dedicated space. That's the first thing that I tell somebody.
Space.
If you can, you make a space, even if it's in your dining room. That's your office, and that's you try to make some mental separation.
Yes,
where
you
I'm
still try
walking
to
to the dining room
compartmentalize it.
table. It's like me commuting to the office.
Yeah.
and trying to make that separation.
What about getting ready for the day? Like I know another big argument is, hey, I could work in my sweatpants.
Yeah.
You know. So do you make it a point to make sure that, or does it matter? Do you feel like it matters?
I think it matters.
Okay.
I get up, I put on jeans, basically this, I put on my shoes, I, brush my teeth, all that stuff. And even, I had a developer that was in this tiny apartment in Brooklyn, and, he's asking me the same thing. And I said, well, why don't you get up, walk down to the bodega every morning, go get a coffee. That's you leaving your home,
Yeah.
and then you turn around and you go back into the office.
Right.
And that was really helpful. And so I do think that it's important to anything that you can do to trick yourself.
Yeah. It's like a ritual, a small
Right.
ritual or something.
I had a friend of mine, I love this story, and this started several years ago, but even before COVID, he was client facing, so he managed a big territory, and he had to dress up, right? He managed banks, banks were his customers, so he'd have to dress pants, dress shirt, and then this company went full remote, so he was, working from home, and he said he was a bum when he tried to work from home in sweatpants and stuff like that. He wasn't getting anything done, so he did that a long time ago. He'd get up, put his dress clothes on. He had an office. He had a coffee pot in the office. So everything was separate. It was as if he went to the office, he'd shut the door, and he was at work.
See, I think
fully dressed.
doing that is a step to doing remote work correctly, in my opinion. Because if you mesh the two too much together, it's going to suffer in many ways.
Well, I think there's a lot of it. Those people that are really dedicated to their work don't know when to shut it off. And I think you get those. There are those that are bad at working remote, and that's kind of I guess part of being bad at working remote is working too much, right? When you don't shut it off and you're working 16 hours a day.
That's a tough one because so one of the developers on my team right now, he really likes to work at night. You know what I mean? So he may not work a few hours during the day and then get on all night, and that's kind of up to him. But he has a different lifestyle. He doesn't have a wife and that type of thing. And
do you guys require any sort of overlap there? Like, hey, you got to be at least beyond
4 hours.
Yeah, well, we don't have it defined right now. I have before at Top Goods, it was very defined, but it's definitely in my expectation. I set expectations in terms of if I ask you a question or somebody asks you a question on Slack, you need to be able to respond. So
within a half hour or whatever.
What about when they're, not online? Like you mentioned, this particular person was working maybe a little bit later. So if you had a question for them early in the morning, would you have expectations that they would still respond?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's got to be core. I think that's the way we typically do it. Is just you got to be available during core hours.
Yeah.
Right? And so if client has a question,
right,
and reaches out to you at 9 a.m.
Yeah, and if you need to turn on your Slack notifications and hook it up to a loudspeaker next to your bed, that's what you need to do, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah, respond and then go back to sleep.
Right.
That's okay. But respond.
Do you guys document or do you follow? Are there any documented communication strategies for facilitating remote work? Is there anything out there that I'm unaware of? If there's any defined guidelines?
I'm sure there are. I've defined things like that, like response times or little things like making sure that your Slack status is accurate. If you're online or especially in a hybrid model, like changing your calendar to say you're going to be on site or remote, or as much as you can around that. I think the rest is about I do a lot of Scrum, and I think the ceremonies are really helpful for that. I had a developer say, our Scrum ceremonies are useless, which to a certain extent I kind of agree with, and that's another problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they're inherently useless. But just having that check-in every day, is really helpful. So a lot of it's just normal process. But yeah, I think it is helpful. Again, to define, I think one clear distinction between on-site and remote is that you have to be really disciplined, really prescriptive, really like this is how things operate. Otherwise, it's quickly going to descend into
When you say
chaos.
that, you mean you guys would provide the requirements, say, hey,
Yes.
this is how it needs to be? Okay.
Yeah, and even if it's a democratic thing where as a team you define what it is,
Yeah.
but I think it's really important to define it,
Well,
whatever.
as you scale, that can get out of hand. So
Yeah.
I 100% agree.
Do you have a camera policy? You got to be on camera, off camera.
That is a thing for me.
Yeah.
I think
Out of curiosity, why? I'm not saying I'm against that.
I
an
think
advocate for
it's
it.
very important.
Okay.
There's a lot of reasons. The main thing is there's so much like that happens through visual communication, right? Just
Body
subtleties.
language, sure.
Right. Like you can see, oh, that person is like wants to make a point, or it just really helps facilitate that communication. And I think it also kind of forces you to like put on your clothes and stuff, like
At least half your clothes.
right. There you go. And I think it really just helps with some of those disciplines. And frankly, like I think that's a lot of times as leaders we try to avoid the making sure somebody's in their desk, but like sometimes you have to make sure that somebody's like actually there working.
That's fair.
Or they're not in someone else's office.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Actually, funny story. At Tap Goods, I didn't witness this, but I heard about it later on. There was a guy that tried to hire himself. He tried to like the person he was hiring. You never saw them. They sounded weird, like there was a voice modulator, and he was trying to pretend like he was a different person so that he could. And so
That is so messed up.
you do have to look out for that stuff, and there's a real risk, and that's why it always again comes back to me like you have to have the right people that want to work there, and that you don't have to like I would rather not have to think about how many hours somebody's working a day. I would rather think about, man, they really killed it this week, and I can see that because
in the form of
Right.
delivering, right?
We did have one person during COVID that had 2 jobs.
Yeah.
I was gonna bring that up.
He allegedly quit his job and came to work for us full time.
Mhm.
But then about a month into it, it was just clear that he was not focused full time on what we were doing, right?
Right.
And we had suspicions, and we were able to confirm, no, he never left his old job. He was
doing
he
2
was
jobs.
working 2 full-time jobs.
How do you feel about that? Should
trying-
somebody be able to do 2 full-time jobs if they think they could handle it?
I haven't heard it come up lately. For a
No,
while
for
at
a little
COVID,
bit.
it was like,
There was a little bit.
hey, if I can do 2 jobs worth of
Then it's
work, then
makes
I
no
should get
difference to
paid
the
for
employer.
it.
Who cares, right?
I think it really depends on the role. I think it's easier for engineers because I think for an engineer it's easy to jump in, work on a problem, jump out, work on a different problem. At least for me, like I can do that. As a leader, I think that would be really difficult. I think it's hard to be as invested as you should. So that said, I work full time. I've got a pretty engaged advice.
And you have a side
Yeah.
deal going too, right?
Yeah, so but I have to be realistic with that client about the level at which
Right.
I can engage with them, and because I think a really good leader, or even a really good in like early startups, a really good engineer is very, very mentally invested, and you that's in your brain and it's taking up space, and it's hard for 2 of those to keep the same space at the same
I
time.
agree.
Right. For sure.
So do you guys track time and hours and all that with your current devs, or do you purely base that off of just what you feel their productivity should be?
For the offshore devs, we track time. For onshore, no. Like I don't think it's useful. It's like it's so easy.
I mean, unless you're billing for their time, but yeah,
right.
yeah,
It's like
makes
so
sense.
easy to lie, and
It is.
like and
Or to just pad it a little bit. Oh,
Right.
I did 6 hours on that, or
Right.
whatever it might be. So
and in some ways they
and
kind of
developers hate doing it. They
Yeah.
hate it. Our guys hate
I
it.
hate
too.
it.
Tracking their
Yes.
hours.
like I wouldn't want to
Yeah.
have to do that. Yeah.
We have to, but
Right.
yeah. So that's very interesting. So I know we touched on this just a little bit about the whole hiring thing, and as far as Homebase is concerned, you haven't really made those decisions yet. But if you guys continue to do hybrid or even remote, would that change your decision? Does it change your set of criteria when you look for somebody? Do you look for anything different than you would otherwise if they were on site?
That's a good question. I would say not really.
You think anybody can learn to just follow the protocol?
I think that anybody that I would hire would be good at either. Like, and again, that's not everyone, but there's a very specific type of person that I prefer to hire, and that's somebody that I don't have to worry about.
Right.
And you don't always get that, but like if you do, then it's the type of person where I could hopefully not talk to them for a week, and I'd talk to them later that week and they tell me all the cool stuff that they did.
I can imagine that in itself would be a problem for most leaders. I can't talk to them for a week. I don't know what they're working on, so they get a little freaked out about that sort of thing.
Yeah, and in interviewing from the remote standpoint, I would think even if you're interviewing somebody and they say, I've never been remote before, wouldn't that scare you a little bit?
Not really, no.
No, you just go with it?
Yeah.
Trust that they can adapt?
So hiring is obviously a whole other topic, and in my opinion, it's another one of those things that's more of an art than a science. I am so much more based on my gut feeling of a person. I do some some basic.
Although my gut's been wrong a few times. Throwing that out there.
Yeah, mine too, for sure. But I do a few basic Rails questions or React questions or whatever, just to make sure that they're not totally full of it. Then I do one kind of weird programming exercise. But for me, the rest of it is just who this person is,
personality type.
Yeah. And so much of that, comes with hopefully, I don't think that it takes any skill to work remote, versus hybrid. I think it's just, do I trust this person? Are they the type of person to do more than I ask? You know what I mean?
Without have a little discipline.
Right. Discipline is a very good way to put it.
That's a good way to put it, because I'd freely admit I'm horrible at it. I'm bad at working remote. I don't enjoy it.
I get lonely. It gets too quiet for me. I do prefer to be here, although I do like my options. I've worked from home a few times this week.
And it's fine if I've got plenty on my calendar and I've got all kinds of stuff to do. I'm fine. But it's the times when you don't, then the discipline comes in that you gotta stay focused and do it. And I find I'm just way more disciplined in the office. But that's just me.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people I wouldn't hire. I have to work from home.
And I got to keep an eye on you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and
when I say I'm working from home, not a chance.
And I think that's the most important part of it, is recognizing when it's the right situation and when it's not.
Sure.
No, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming in and talking to us. So this was awesome. This was a good conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hope you felt good about it too.
Definitely. Anytime.